I didn't want him. That's the first lie I tell myself when I replay how this started. The truth is quieter and harder to defend. I noticed him before I admitted I was noticing anything at all. My name is Larkin. I'm 34 years old, married, functional. The kind of woman people describe as grounded, which usually means predictable. I live 2 exits from my mother, which felt like a good idea until she married him. His name is Eamon Hale. My mother introduced him like he was a correction she'd finally made. "This is Eamon," she said, smiling too hard, squeezing his arm like she needed to prove something. He wasn't what I expected. He wasn't older and soft and grateful. He was alert, still, the kind of man who doesn't rush to fill space with noise. He looked at me for half a second longer than necessary, not in a hungry way, worse. Like he was clocking me. I remember thinking, this is going to be complicated. Not sexually, not yet, just energetically, like 2 magnets placed too close without touching. You might already be trying to pin blame. On him, on me, on my mother for marrying someone who didn't blend into the background. I've done that too. It doesn't stick. At dinner that night, he sat across from me. My husband, Pierce, was beside me, scrolling through emails under the table, nodding at the wrong moments. Eamon asked me questions, real ones, what I did with my time, what I missed about the city I moved away from. He listened without waiting for his turn to talk. That shouldn't matter. But when you've been married long enough, you notice who notices you. I told myself I was just being polite, that the small tightening in my chest was nothing. That the way he remembered my answer later was coincidence, that when his knee brushed mine under the table, it was accidental. Here's the thing no one likes to say out loud. Attraction doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It creeps. It settles in places you weren't guarding. After dinner, my mother sent him to help me carry boxes up from my car. Leftover wedding decorations she wanted stored in my garage. Pierce stayed inside, distracted by a game on TV. The garage was cold. Eamon closed the door behind us without thinking. Or maybe he did. The sound echoed louder than it should have. "Your mom said you're the organized one," he said. "She exaggerates," I replied. He smiled, just slightly, like he was holding something back. We stacked boxes. Our arms brushed again. This time we both noticed. No apology, no adjustment. Just a pause that lasted one breath too long. That was the first line, not physical, psychological. The moment I realized he was aware of the same thing I was. I stepped away first. I needed to. My heart was doing something unfamiliar, too fast, too alert. I told myself it was discomfort, that this was awkward because it should be awkward. That's what people say when they want to feel innocent. Over the next few weeks, I found excuses to be around. Family gatherings, errands for my mother, things that sounded reasonable when I said them out loud. I didn't dress differently. That would have made it obvious. I dressed more like myself, which somehow felt worse. Eamon never crossed a line. That's important. He never flirted openly, never touched me where someone could see. But he watched. He remembered. Yet he waited for silences and didn't rush to fill them. Once, while my mother was in the other room, he said quietly, "You seem like someone who's always holding something back." I laughed it off. "Everyone is." He shook his head. "Not like you." That sentence followed me home, sat with me while Pierce talked about work, lay between us in bed while he slept. I started to feel watched even when Eamon wasn't there, like something in me had been noticed and named. And naming is dangerous. Once something has a shape, you can't pretend it doesn't exist. The guilt came in waves, sudden and sharp. I'd be driving and feel it hit my chest like nausea. I'd picture my mother's face, Pierce's trust, the version of myself I thought I was. Then I'd remember the way Eamon's voice dropped when he spoke only to me, the way he never rushed away. Yet the way he didn't reassure me that everything was fine. That was the problem. He didn't make it safe. The first time we were alone, not just passing through shared space, was unplanned. A storm knocked out power at my mother's house. She was at work. Pierce was out of town. I stopped by to check the place. Eamon was already there, sleeves rolled up, flashlight in hand. The house was quiet in a way that felt intimate. No background noise, no witnesses. "We'll just wait it out," he said. I should have left. I didn't. We sat at opposite ends of the couch, distance that felt performative. The conversation stayed normal, safe topics, weather, the neighborhood. Then it drifted. "Are you happy?" he asked. It wasn't intrusive, it wasn't flirtatious, it was worse, it was sincere. I hesitated, just long enough to matter. He noticed. I'm not asking you to answer," he said. "I was just curious." But curiosity is a form of hunger. The power shifted there, subtly. I realized he was careful because he wanted to be, not because he didn't want anything. That restraint felt heavier than desire. When the lights flickered back on, neither of us moved right away. We sat there, aware of what hadn't happened, of what could. As I stood to leave, he said my name, not urgently, softly. "Larkin." I turned. "Be careful," he said. I smiled like I didn't understand, like I was still the good daughter, the loyal wife, the woman who hadn't already crossed a line she couldn't uncross. But when I drove home, my hands were shaking. And when my phone lit up later that night with a message from an unfamiliar number that simply said, "Did you make it home okay?" I didn't ask how he got it. I just stared at the screen longer than I should have. That's where this really began. Not with touch, not with betrayal in the obvious sense, but with attention, with restraint, with two adults pretending they weren't already negotiating something dangerous. If you're still listening, it's probably because part of you understands that moment. The quiet one. The one where nothing happens and everything changes. That was the first line I crossed, and I didn't even feel it under my feet. The next morning, I woke up already tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes, the kind that comes from carrying something you didn't go to bed with. Pierce was still out of town. The house was quiet. My phone was on the nightstand, face down, like it might accuse me if I looked at it too directly. I didn't open Eamon's message right away. I made coffee first. Let the water boil too long. Stood at the sink staring out the window like I was waiting for permission to exist. When I finally picked up the phone, my thumb hesitated like it was deciding who I was going to be that day. "I made it," I typed, then deleted it, then typed it again. I told myself that was polite, that ignoring him would have been rude, that responding didn't mean anything. His reply came slower than I expected. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made me restless. "I'm good," he wrote. I wasn't sure if I should check in. That line sat with me all day. I wasn't sure. It implied restraint, awareness. The fact that he'd debated it at all meant he knew exactly what he was doing. We didn't text constantly. That's another lie people expect you to tell. Some sudden flood of messages, obsession right away. It wasn't like that. It was worse, sparse, intentional. Messages that looked harmless if anyone glanced at them. Messages that landed heavier than they should have. He asked how my day was. I answered honestly. He remembered things. Followed up days later. That kind of attention gets under your skin. It makes you feel chosen without ever being claimed. At home, Pierce noticed nothing. He never does. He's not cruel. He's not inattentive in the way people warn you about. He's just comfortable. He assumes I'll always be where he left me. I started telling him less. Not big things, small ones, the kind you don't miss until they're gone. I didn't talk about my mother as much. Didn't mention Eamon at all. That omission felt heavier than a lie. The next time I saw Eamon in person, it was at my mother's place again. Sunday afternoon, bright, ordinary. She made too much food, talked too loudly, tried too hard. I watched them together, how he let her lead conversations, how he deferred to her in public. It softened my guilt in a way I didn't like. It made him look loyal. When our eyes met across the room, he didn't smile. He just nodded. Like we shared something quiet and private in a space full of people. Later, while my mother was distracted on a phone call, he came into the kitchen where I was pretending to clean. "So, you okay?" he asked. "Fine," I said. He didn't accept that. He leaned against the counter close enough that I could feel his presence without him touching me. "You don't seem fine," he said. That was when I realized something important. He wasn't pushing. He was inviting, letting me decide how far this went. That made it feel like my responsibility, my fault. "I'm just tired," I said. He studied my face like he was memorizing it. Then he stepped back, gave me space, too much space. That night, I dreamed about him, not sex. That would have been easier to dismiss. I dreamed about standing next to him in a quiet room, not speaking, just knowing we were both aware of the same thing. I woke up unsettled and embarrassed, like my own mind had betrayed me. The texts continued, still spaced out, still careful. Sometimes days would pass. Those days were the worst. I found myself checking my phone for no reason, rereading old messages like they might change. One evening, I sent the first message that wasn't a response. "My mom says you fixed the back gate," I wrote. "She's impressed." I stared at it for a full minute before hitting send. That message wasn't necessary. It didn't add anything. It just reopened the door. His reply came almost immediately this time. "She worries about small things," he wrote. "I don't mind fixing them." I read that sentence too many ways. Wondered if it was meant the way it sounded. Decided it didn't matter. The fact that I wondered at all was enough. We started finding ourselves alone more often, not intentionally. At least that's how I framed it. I arrived early. He stayed late. Someone always had an excuse. Someone always left the room. Once, while my mother was upstairs, he asked me quietly, "Does Pierce know you come by this often?" It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't jealous. It was curious, testing a boundary. "He doesn't mind," I said. "Does he know?" he asked again. I didn't answer. That silence was another line, one I stepped over without feeling my foot hit the ground. I started dressing differently when I knew I'd see him. Not provocative, just deliberate. Clothes that made me feel present in my body, that felt like control, like I was choosing something for myself. The guilt shifted shape. It became background noise instead of sharp pain. Easier to ignore. I told myself nothing had happened, that thoughts weren't actions, that attention wasn't betrayal. But secrecy does something to you. It makes everything feel more charged. A look becomes loaded. A pause stretches. A simple sentence feels like a confession. One night after my mother went to bed early, the power went out again. Coincidence. That's what I told myself. I was already there. Eamon lit candles. We sat at the table this time, closer than before. "I don't think this is a good idea," he said suddenly. My heart dropped. Panic flared before I could stop it. "I didn't say it was," I replied. He looked at me then. Really looked. "You know what I mean." I did. "Then why are you here?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. The candles flickered. The house felt smaller. "Because I don't trust myself to stop thinking about it," he said finally. That sentence did something to me. Not because it was romantic, because it was honest. And honesty feels like intimacy when it's shared selectively. I should have left. Again. Instead, I stayed. And we didn't touch. We didn't have to. The tension was doing the work for us. It sat between us, thick and undeniable. When I got home that night, Pierce was asleep. I stood in the doorway watching him breathe, feeling like I was already somewhere else, like part of me had stepped outside the life I was supposed to be living. I told myself I would end it, that I would create distance, that this was just a phase, a reaction to boredom, to change, to my mother's new life disrupting my own. The next morning, Eamon texted me first. "I don't regret last night," he wrote, "but I think we need to be careful." I stared at that message longer than any before it. Because somewhere deep down, beneath the guilt and the logic and the fear, I realized something that scared me more than anything else. Being careful wasn't what I wanted. And once you admit that to yourself, to someone else, it stops feeling like an accident. It starts feeling like a choice. I told myself I'd pull back, that I'd be the one to create distance, that if I could just reset the tone, everything would slide back into place like it never happened. That's what people who still believe they're in control tell themselves. I didn't stop seeing Eamon. I just stopped pretending I didn't want to. The shift wasn't dramatic. No declarations, no late-night confessions. It was quieter than that. We stopped circling the truth and started standing closer to it. The messages changed first, still careful, still defensible. But the pauses between them felt intentional now, like we were both aware of what was being unsaid. I noticed how my body responded before my mind did. How I leaned forward when my phone buzzed. How I felt a strange disappointment when it wasn't him. How ordinary moments, grocery shopping, folding laundry, while she's sitting through meetings, felt hollow, like they were happening in the wrong room. Pierce sensed something. Not the affair, just the absence. He asked if I was stressed, if work was too much, if I wanted to plan a trip. I said no to everything. Not because I didn't want solutions, but because I didn't want to explain the problem. The next time Eamon and I were alone, it wasn't planned. It never was, officially. My mother had asked me to stop by to pick up some paperwork she'd left out. She wasn't home yet. Eamon was. The house felt different when it was just the two of us now, charged, alert, like it knew what we were pretending not to. "You shouldn't be here alone with me," he said as I set my bag down. "You didn't leave," I replied. He didn't argue. That felt like permission. We stood in the kitchen, not touching, not moving closer either. The air between us felt tight, like it might snap if either of us shifted our weight. "I keep thinking about you," he said finally. Not apologetic, not proud, just factual. My heart thudded hard enough that I wondered if he could hear it. "I think about you too," I said. Saying it out loud felt reckless, necessary. He stepped closer, slowly, gave me time to stop him. I didn't. He didn't touch me right away. He just stood there, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, smell his cologne. My body reacted before my brain could intervene. My breath changed. My shoulders relaxed like I'd been bracing for something and finally stopped. "This is wrong," he said quietly. "I know," I said. Neither of us moved. When he finally touched me, it was brief, almost nothing, his hand against my wrist, light, testing. It sent a shock through me that felt completely disproportionate to the contact. I gasped before I could stop myself. He let go immediately. "I can't," he said, stepping back like he'd been burned. That should have been it. That should have been the moment everything ended. Instead, something ugly and honest rose up in me. Frustration, desire, a sudden need to reclaim control. "Then don't," I said. "But don't pretend you don't want this." He looked at me then, really looked, like he was deciding something. "You don't understand what this would do," he said. "I understand exactly what it would do," I replied. "And I'm still here." That was when the dynamic shifted, not because of what we did, but because of who moved first. He didn't rush me, didn't grab. He stepped in slowly, deliberately, as like he was crossing a border he'd studied carefully. When he touched me again, it wasn't hesitant. It was restrained, controlled. That restraint felt heavier than anything else. I won't describe what followed in detail, not because it didn't matter, but because the specifics aren't the point. What mattered was the way time collapsed, the way the world narrowed down to breath and proximity and the shared understanding that this was no longer theoretical. Afterward, after we stepped back, straightened clothes, pretended nothing irreversible had happened, we stood there in silence. "I don't regret it," I said before he could speak. He didn't answer right away. His face was tight, like he was holding something in place. "That's what scares me," he said. Things changed after that. Not dramatically, subtly. He became more guarded in public, more careful around my mother. Around me, he was quieter. Intense in a way that made me feel like I'd unsettled something. I liked that more than I should have. The secrecy deepened. We didn't meet often. We didn't need to. Every interaction felt amplified now. A look could carry an entire conversation. A single message could ruin my focus for hours. I started to notice how much power that gave me. If I pulled back, he noticed. If I lingered, he responded. I told myself I wasn't doing it on purpose, that I wasn't testing him. But I was aware of the effect I had, and awareness changes things. Once, while my mother was in the next room, I leaned in close to ask him a question that didn't require it. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked toward the doorway. "Don't," he whispered. I smiled, not kindly. That was the moment I realized the balance had tipped. What began as mutual restraint had become something else. I wasn't just responding anymore. I was provoking. The guilt came back then, sharper, meaner. It showed up in strange places, watching my mother laugh, hearing Pierce talk about the future, catching my reflection in the mirror when I thought no one was watching. I started sleeping poorly, eating less, feeling restless in my own skin. Desire does that when it has nowhere clean to go. One night, Pierce reached for me in bed. Routine, familiar. I let it happen. I stared at the ceiling and felt nothing. That emptiness scared me more than the affair ever had. The next morning, I texted Eamon first. "I can't do this halfway," I wrote. His reply came after a long pause. "Neither can I. That should have scared me." Instead, it felt like relief. We were past the point of pretending this was an accident, past the idea that we could just rewind. Something had been claimed. Attention, control, space inside my head, and it wasn't giving itself back easily. The last time I saw him that week, my mother almost caught us. Not in the act, not touching, just standing too close in a hallway that suddenly felt very small. She looked between us, laughed it off, walked away. My stomach dropped. Eamon exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath. "That was close," he said. I should have been terrified. Instead, a dangerous thought slipped into my mind, uninvited and unwelcome. What if being caught wouldn't end this? I didn't finish the thought. I didn't have to. Because once you start wondering how far something can go, you're already further in than you ever planned to be. There's a point where secrecy stops feeling like protection and starts feeling like pressure. I didn't notice when I crossed into that part. I just know that suddenly everything felt tighter, more fragile, like one wrong move would make a sound I couldn't take back. Eamon started avoiding me in obvious ways, not cutting me off, nothing that clean, but spacing himself out when other people were around. He kept conversations short, neutral, safe. It was the right thing to do. I hated it. I told myself I missed the connection, the intensity, the honesty. But if I'm being honest with you now, what I missed was the pull. The way he used to look at me like I was something he was trying not to reach for. Distance made me feel unchosen, and I didn't like how quickly that feeling turned sharp. So I started closing the gap. Not directly. I wasn't reckless enough for that. I became present. I lingered in doorways. I sat closer than necessary. I asked him questions that didn't need answers. I reminded him, quietly, that whatever he was trying to shut down was still there. Once, while my mother was outside taking a call, I leaned in and said, "You don't have to punish yourself." His eyes darkened. His voice stayed steady. "I'm not punishing myself. I'm trying to keep this from becoming something worse." That word, worse, did something to me. "Is it worse?" I asked, "or just harder to control?" He didn't answer. He turned away. That felt like rejection, even though it wasn't meant to be. And rejection makes people do strange things when they are already standing on a fault line. I stopped being careful with my thoughts. I let them wander. And I let myself imagine scenarios I used to shut down immediately. I started dressing with intention again, knowing he'd notice even if he pretended not to. Knowing restraint has limits. Pierce asked me one night if something was wrong between us. His voice was gentle, concerned. It made my chest tighten with a kind of shame that felt almost abstract. "No," I said, too quickly. "I'm just tired." He nodded, accepted it. That hurt more than if he'd pushed. The next time Eamon and I were alone, it was late. too late. My mother had fallen asleep on the couch. The house was dim and quiet. I should have left. I stayed. "You're playing with fire," he said softly, not accusing, observing. "Are you scared?" I asked. "Yes," he said, immediately. "That's the problem." That honesty disarmed me. For a moment, I almost backed off, so almost chose the easier exit. But fear also meant he was still in this, still affected, still tethered. "You don't have to protect me," I said. "I'm not," he replied. "I'm protecting everyone else." That stung. It implied I wasn't. Something in me hardened then. Not cruelty, defiance. I was tired of being the one who felt everything while he got to play restraint and responsibility. I stepped closer. Too close. "You don't get to decide that alone," I said. His hand came up, not to touch me, but to stop me. He held it there, hovering between us like a physical barrier. "Larkin," he said, low, warning. I moved anyway. What happened after wasn't explosive. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet and charged and undeniably real. We didn't rush. We didn't speak much. We crossed another line with the full understanding that this one couldn't be uncrossed. Afterward, he pulled away first. "This can't keep happening," he said. I nodded, said nothing. But inside, something twisted. Can't sounded temporary, negotiable. From that point on, the balance shifted fully. He tried to regain control. I didn't let him. Not openly, but subtly. I reminded him of what we shared, of how he'd responded, of how impossible it was to pretend nothing had changed. I could feel myself becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone sharper, more intentional. I hated that I liked it. My mother started noticing small things. A look held too long, a tension she couldn't name. She asked if everything was okay between Eamon and me. "Of course," I said, smiling. "So why wouldn't it be?" That was the moment I realized I could lie easily now. Eamon began pulling away more noticeably after that. Short answers, avoided eye contact, declined opportunities to be alone. It was the responsible thing to do. It felt like abandonment. One night I showed up unannounced. I told myself it was about paperwork, about my mother, about something that made sense. He knew better the moment he opened the door. "This isn't okay," he said. "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm here." That was the moment, the real one, when I understood I'd gone too far. Not because of what we were doing, but because of how little I was willing to stop. He looked tired, worn down, human in a way that stripped the fantasy bare. "If this comes out," he said, "it destroys everything." I didn't argue. I didn't reassure him. I just said, "Oh, I know." And the worst part? I wasn't sure that was enough to make me stop. As I drove home later, heart racing, hands unsteady on the wheel, a thought settled in that I couldn't shake. I wasn't afraid of losing control anymore. I was afraid of what I'd do if I got it back. Because once desire turns into leverage, once affection turns into power, you're not chasing pleasure anymore. You're chasing proof. And I was dangerously close to proving something I wasn't ready to name. People think the worst part of an affair is getting caught. It isn't. The worst part is the waiting, when nothing has happened yet, but everything feels inevitable. When every choice feels like it's already been made somewhere deeper than logic. After that night, things didn't explode. They thinned out. Conversations shortened. Messages came slower. Eamon became careful in a way that felt deliberate, like he was trying to starve something without killing it outright. I told myself that was good, that this was how it ended. A slow fade, no wreckage, no scene. But endings don't feel like that. They feel final. This felt suspended. My mother was happier than I'd seen her in years. She talked about the future with an optimism that made my chest ache. Trips they might take, changes to the house. The way she said his name like it was a reward she'd earned. I listened. I nodded. I played my part. At home, Pierce sensed the distance widening. He tried harder, booked a dinner, suggested counseling, casually, like it was a tune-up and not an alarm. I agreed to dinner. I smiled. I laughed at the right moments. I felt like I was watching myself from somewhere slightly behind my own eyes. Eamon and I stopped being alone. Truly alone. That should have helped. Instead, every almost moment felt louder. Every glance carried more weight because it had nowhere to go. One afternoon, my mother asked me to help her sort old photos. Eamon was there, sitting across the room, pretending to read. The domestic normalcy of it all made my skin prickle. This was the life he belonged to, the one I was orbiting but didn't own. At one point, my mother left the room to take a call. The silence stretched. Eamon didn't look at me. "This has to stop," he said quietly. I swallowed. "Is it stopping because you want it to, or because you're scared?" He looked up then. His expression wasn't angry. It was tired, and something about that tiredness made my throat tighten. "Both," he said. That honesty cracked something open in me. I wanted to reach for him. I didn't. "I don't know how to go back to before," I admitted. He nodded once. "Neither do I." That was it. No promises, no closure, just two people acknowledging damage without agreeing on repair. After that, I pulled back. For real this time. I didn't text. I didn't linger. I let the space grow even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. I told myself this was what responsibility felt like. But restraint doesn't erase desire. It just sharpens it. Late at night, I replayed moments I hadn't let myself fully feel before. The quiet intensity, the way he'd said my name, the knowledge that he'd wanted me and chosen not to take everything. That restraint had once felt noble. Now it felt like unfinished business. A week passed, then two. Then one night, my phone buzzed. A message from Eamon. "We need to talk." 4 words, no context, no apology, no explanation. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, mind racing ahead to consequences I couldn't fully picture. I didn't reply right away. I set the phone down, walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water I didn't drink. When I came back, there was another message. "I'm not asking you to come over. I just don't want to pretend this didn't happen." That line undid me more than anything else he'd ever said. Not asking, not demanding, just naming the truth we'd both been circling. I typed and erased 3 different replies before sending, "I don't either." The next day felt stretched thin. Every interaction loaded with anticipation. I caught myself watching the clock, imagining conversations that hadn't happened yet, preparing defenses I wasn't sure I believed. When I saw him later, it was in public, neutral ground, a place where touching would have been impossible without being seen. That felt intentional, responsible. We talked quietly, carefully, about boundaries, about damage, about what this could do if it continued. "I don't want to hurt her," he said. "I know," I replied. "I don't want to hurt you either." That surprised me. I hadn't realized how much I wanted to hear it. "And Pierce?" he asked. That name landed heavier than the others. I don't know what I want from my marriage anymore," I said. Not accusing, not blaming, just stating a fact that had been true longer than I'd admitted. He studied me for a long moment. "That's not an answer." "No," I said. "It's not." We sat there, surrounded by strangers, having the most private conversation of my life. When we stood to leave, he hesitated, then leaned in just slightly, close enough that only I could hear him. "If you ask me to stop completely," he said, "I will." That offer, clean, simple, devastating, hung between us. I didn't answer. Because here's the truth I'm still wrestling with, and maybe this is why I'm telling you all of this instead of someone who actually knows me. I don't know if what I feel makes me selfish or just honest. I don't know if wanting something you shouldn't automatically makes you the villain, or if pretending you don't want it is its own kind of lie. I haven't decided if this was a mistake or a revelation. I haven't decided if I'm someone who crossed a line, or someone who finally noticed it was there. All I know is this. The wanting didn't disappear when I chose restraint. It just learned how to wait. And somewhere between the life I'm living and the one I almost stepped into, I'm still standing still. Phone in my hand, heart racing, wondering which version of myself I'm going to answer next time it buzzes.